Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to Talk Time with Pastor Krista. So I have a little announcement to make before we get started today. If we were going to be in church together, Sunday would be our last Sunday of Sunday school. So I am going to continue Talk Times over the summer. However, I'm only going to be doing them on Tuesdays and Thursdays starting next week. So I will announce that tomorrow and I'll announce it on Friday again. But please remember, if you want to check out our talk times, all through summer, we'll be doing them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And if we can't, and I'm hoping we can, but if when school starts we can't come back to church, I'll go back to doing them 5 days a week. So spread the words to your friends who are watching this, and I am really grateful that you are joining us today. So today we're going to start with a very special Bible story, and it's a Bible story, imagine that Jesus told, because our Bible is full of those awesome stories, isn't it? And this Bible story is taken from the book of Luke, and it's a story about sheep. Now, we call Jesus our shepherd because Jesus kind of pulls us all together. That's what a shepherd does. Takes its sheep through the fields and it makes sure the sheep stay together in a big group. But all those different sheep, like we talked about yesterday, are all a little different from one another. And this Bible story tells us that if one sheep is lost, that Jesus will go and look for that sheep. So if a shepherd has a bunch of sheep together and one sheep strays away or gets lost or is hurt or is in pain or is a little confused, Jesus will find that sheep, or the shepherd will find that sheep and bring that sheep back into the flock. So we're going to be reading today from Luke 15, and we are going to start with chapter 4. And this is what it says. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep." Now, sometimes in life, we get a little lost. And we're really grateful that we have the lessons in our Bible about Jesus and God to help us be found again. But sometimes there's a group of people in our world that might seem a little lost. And there are certain people that stick out, like Jesus stuck out in our Bible. There are certain people that stick out in our world. And their actions are so important and so incredible that they make a difference for one sheep or for one group. Now, I'm going to talk to you about 3 of those different people today. And one of them was very famous, but the other 2, they were not when they started out making their difference. When they started out trying to pull the lost sheep back together, trying to pull that one group that was hurting a little bit back together. So I'm going to hold up my first picture. And this picture is of Martin Luther King Jr. Now, Martin Luther King Jr., kind of cool, his dad was a minister. So he probably heard his dad speaking in public a lot. He was probably a really good speaker. Actually, when he got older, it turns out that he was. In the 1960s, so I was born in 1962, so I was very, very little when Martin Luther King Jr. was famous. He led a march on Washington. He organized 250,000 people to go to our Capitol in Washington, D.C. And when he got all the 250,000 people in front of them, he got up to the microphone. Imagine the butterflies that would be in your stomach if that was you. And he got up to the microphone and he gave the people a speech. And the speech was about having a dream. And the dream Martin Luther King Jr. had was that all people on earth would be treated fairly. He had a dream that the whole flock of sheep on God's earth would all stay together, that never would one stray and feel in pain or be afraid. And that was Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. Now, very important for us to remember that dream as we talk about these other two people who actually came before Martin Luther King Jr. Now, you might say, well, he was a famous, popular guy. What difference can I make? Everyone here has a power within them. And if we walk and stay close to Jesus Christ, our power becomes more special and it becomes bigger. So I am going to hold up a picture of a family. And this family you may not have ever seen before. And some of my older kiddos who are watching today, they will know when I say who this family is. But those of you who are little, you can look forward to learning this in school. This is the Brown family. And Mr. Brown and Mrs. Brown had two daughters. And I know it's hard for us to imagine this, especially if we live around Buffalo, New York. But his two daughters had to walk a great distance to a school that was from their house. Now, there was a school that was closer to their home, but they couldn't go to that school because at that time, only white children went to one school and only black children went to another. At that time, even drinking fountains, imagine that, had to be separate. Black people, our black brothers and sisters and friends and neighbors, they had to drink from a different drinking fountain than white people could drink from. Mr. Brown saw his daughters walking to this school that was so much further than a school that was a little closer. And he knew that that was not right, that that was not fair. So he was shepherding his family. He was seeing that his children were a little lost, and he was doing what Jesus did. He was trying to pull the one back in with the many so it would be a good journey for all. Mr. Brown went to the Board of Education in his town and he said, this is not right. My daughter's walking to a school that doesn't have as many teachers, that doesn't have as many programs, and I want an education for my black children like the white children are getting. And this man, when he went to the Board of Education, probably didn't think he was going to be changing the world as much as he did. But that act of love by that dad ended up changing how we educate children. That's why when you sit in your classrooms, you can have the joy of people who are of a different color, of children who are different races, all sitting with you so we can all learn from one another like we are one big group of sheep. And when we see one drifting away, when we see one confused or hurting or in pain or lost, it's our job to try to pull them back together. Now, one of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to do was to do everything peacefully. And he said that you're going to get more action if you do it peacefully than if you do this violently. So I am going to show you a picture of a woman who decided to do something very peacefully and talk about the power of one person. This lady made a huge change, and her name is Rosa Parks. So a long, long time ago in 1955, Mrs. Parks was 42 years old. She took a ride on a bus because she lived in a city. And on that bus, just like there were separate drinking fountains and separate schools, there were separate parts on the bus for white people and black people to sit. And if you're following my story, you can probably imagine that the white people got the good seats in the front of the bus, and the black people had to sit from the middle of the bus back. So Mrs. Parks walked in and she sat in the first row where the black people could sit. And the bus driver looked back and said, "You have to move." Mrs. Parks didn't understand why. She was sitting where she was supposed to sit, but the bus driver said, "You have to go to the back of the bus." Now, what Mrs. Parks did next is a very important lesson. Mrs. Parks didn't push the bus driver, didn't hit the bus driver, didn't cuss at the bus driver. All Mrs. Parks did was say no. That's all she did. She sat there and she said no. Now, Mrs. Parks was arrested. And when Mrs. Parks was in jail and after she was released, a reporter asked her a question and said to her, "Were you tired? Is that why you wouldn't move to the back of the bus? You just worked all day. Were you a little tired?" And this is what she said, guys, and listen really carefully. She said, "The only tired I was was tired of giving in. And some of what we're seeing in our country right now is because people are tired of giving in. Some of what we're seeing happen right now is because we are realizing as a society, as a group of people living together on the earth, that there are some lost sheep. And there are some very brave people who are leaving the other sheep to go help the lost sheep and bring them back into the fold. That's a very important lesson today. So I want you to think about that as you go through the rest of this week. You might catch something on the news or a conversation that adults are having. And I want you to think of those really good lessons that we learned today, because Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and the Brown family and Mr. and Mrs. Brown, they all acted like Jesus would have acted. And it's important for us to remember those lessons. So we're going to sing a song today called Jesus Loves the Little Children, because this is a song about all the children of the world. So join me if you're at home and you know the song. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. Jesus loves all the little children, and Jesus loves you. So let's join together in our benediction, and tomorrow we're going to be having a fun talk time with Sam and Kathleen and Michael. So please join us tomorrow. So join me, please. My heart loves your heart because Jesus first loved us. God bless you. Remember our lessons, and we will see you tomorrow.